Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne and welcome to Mama Paul in the Kitchen. Today is Tuesday, March the 16th, 2021. It's the day before St. Patty's Day. Now, normally I cook some food dish, but today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make what I call the Hangover Formula. The Hangover Formula. And there's three reasons I'm going to do it today. Three reasons. One, St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow. A lot of people are going to go out drinking, and they're going to drink too much. Going to wake up the next morning with a hangover. What do you do with a hangover? Well, some people, the old formula for a lot of people is going to be sort of a, what do they call it, the hair of the dog, where you have the drink commensuratory with what you were drinking the night before, so you have a Bloody Mary for breakfast or something. Well, we're not going to go in that direction. We're going to do something a little bit more healing. St. Patrick's Day yesterday. The second thing that brought it up was Rachel last night using the word hangover, and she was talking about the Trump hangover, and it had to do with Louis DeJoy is still in charge of the Postal Department, and he was appointed by the board of directors who had been appointed by Trump. So the only way to get him out of that position is to appoint some new members to their board, and then they will vote him out. So that's what the process that's happening right now. So they're in the process of doing something so that we get rid of the Trump hangover in the post office. So the second reference to hangover. And the third was my day job, which is actually at night, is as a waiter in an Italian restaurant. And over the years when I've gone into work, frequently, more than I'd like to have happen, somebody has not been feeling well. Could be the cook, could be a waiter, could be somebody else. They're having a stomach ache. Usually it's a stomach ache or something to that effect. Well, last night I get to work and the gal I work with is like doubled over. She is a mess. And after a couple of trips to the bathroom, I said, well, listen, let me go to my car and get my little magic recipe, my formula. So what I have is I keep this in the car. And it's a little bag I keep in the car, and it says on it, it says Kudzu. And what it is it's a combination of Umeboshi Plums, Kudzu, and Twig tea, and then at the very end, we put a tiny shot of soy sauce in there. Now, this all goes back to, maybe we can bring this in, come in on a close-up of these here. There we go. Maybe that's a little bit better. None of these are in original packing. This was in a flat little box, and I've transferred it to this jar here. The Kudzu I generally buy in bulk in the herb section, and the Kukichicha tea is also called a Banche twig tea. And this is sort of interesting history on this little puppy too. I'm going to get the thing started, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So the way we make this is, it's not really that difficult. Kudzu is a medicinal starch. What we do with this is we take maybe, let's say, a teaspoon or a tablespoon. We're going to put that in there. We're going to dilute this in cold water. We're then going to take the umeboshi plums and cook them in a pot, a couple of cups of water. We're going to add a little bit of the tea. And this is going to help alkalize the plum, which originally is more acidic but becomes alkaline in your tummy. So we got a little pot over here, and turn my back for a second, and we'll just put some water in here. This is definitely not a do it by measurements. Maybe a cup and a half, 2 cups. The more water you put in there will depend on how long we reduce this whole deal. And let's put the little water in here too. So we're going to put the water in here. Kudzu needs cold water to dissolve. When we add it at the end in the hot water, that's when it gets thicker. Right now, it's going to dissolve. So here, I'm going to get Umeboshi Paste, and I'll tell you what all these things are in a minute. And we're going to get like, a good tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. A teaspoon and a half, rather, tablespoon, somewhere in there. Salty, really salty. And we're going to throw a little Banche twig tea in there. How much? A little bit, a small handful. And then we're going to turn the flame on. And excuse me going in front of the camera. I haven't quite worked out all the logistics of this worst laid out kitchen in the entire world. Whoever had a kitchen where the stove was a standalone unit built next to an indent. So if two people are in this area here, it's a bloody nightmare, let's face it. But we're going to work with it. We'll work with what we've got. So we're on the stove right now. I have the water here, paste, the Umeboshi paste, and the Banche tea in here. We're going to let that come to a boil. We're going to mix it a little bit to break up the paste a little bit more. And after it reduces down for a few minutes, then we will add the Kudzu. So let me go through the different items that are in here right now. This whole drink is specifically for stomach problems. Having said that, it's also good for diarrhea, it's good for energy, it's good for fatigue, it's good for all sorts of cramps. The list goes on and on what they recommend this stuff for. Ulcers, hyperacidity, indigestion, aches and pains. Over the years, I have kept a cooked version of this in my refrigerator, ready to just drink, so I don't have to make it, because I use it every so often, either for myself or for somebody else, and it really works. And that's the reason I'm so excited about this particular. You know, like chicken soup is good, chicken soup for the soul, and chicken soup is a cure-all. Well, the reason chicken soup is so good for you is because the bones have been crushed up and all those minerals and nutraceuticals in the bones get into the chicken broth, and then you add your ginger, your garlic, a little cayenne pepper, and those things boost the healing properties of the chicken broth. So, like we've said in the past, food is your best medicine. Food is your best medicine. And if you can get food to work for you in a positive way, it's better than going to the drugstore and buying pills, that's for sure. So let me just talk about the couple of ingredients. The Umeboshi plums. The Umeboshi plums are salted plums, and they're pickled plums. And you used to be able to buy the whole plum. Nowadays, it's a paste that they sell. If you search around, you may find the plums, but I'm satisfied with the paste. It works really well. But the salted plums, they're basically pickled for 2 years in a crock. And over that time, they develop these very medicinal properties. So the plums are used two ways. They're used culinarily as a substitute for vinegar, as a additive for various sauces and things. And they're also used more medicinally for stomach aches, cramps, migraines, headaches, acidity, fatigue, dysentery. I mean, my God. There were Japanese samurai used to take the whole plum, and they would wrap it in a little cheesecloth and keep it around their belly, underneath their belt, in order to promote healing and health in the tummy. So the water's at a boil here. I'm going to turn it down, and I'm going to give a little squish to the plum, so it's broken up in there. We're going to let that just sit there and simmer for a few minutes while I continue talking about these couple of items. Okay, the Kudzu. The Kudzu is it's like a medicinal form of arrowroot. Now I don't know exactly what the prices are, but let's say arrowroot was $10 a pound. This Kudzu would be about $40, $50 a pound. So it's not something you would generally use in your cooking to thicken things up. It's too expensive. But medicinally, Kudzu is quite incredible. And I've got it right here. I dug this all out of an old book, Healing Ourselves by Morimoto. This is a book I've had for a long time. And he was a Japanese proponent of the macrobiotic diet. And he was really, really into all of these different healing remedies and recipes. And I met him a couple of times. Interesting guy. He smoked too much. Most of the macros smoked way too much. But other than that, he was brilliant in these recipes and formulas. Like I said, this book is probably not easy to get, if you can get it at all anymore. Kudzu It's a really deep root, and it's actually it grows 3 feet long, the root. They started planting this back in the southeast part of the country 20, 30 years ago, and it started taking over. There are areas in the south that have these huge kudzu plants. You know, they sort of have that look of ginger. They look like little human beings growing out of the air. The kudzu is known for curing colds, healing weak intestines, neutralizing acidity, alleviating body pain, relaxing tight muscles, blah, blah, blah. What's happening here with this drink is the kudzu, the umeboshi plum, is going to kill the poison that's in your tummy, and the kudzu is going to coat the inside of it and soothe things. So if you take this drink and you have a really upset stomach, within 15 minutes you're going to feel a lot better. So I'm going to those chunks of kudzu in there, they're all diluting right now. And you can see this whole thing, it looks like a little milky white substance. Some people just drink kudzu as a regular kind of daily intestinal fortifier. I don't, but some people do. At the end of the day, we're going to add a drop of Tamari soy sauce in there. That may be more traditional, have nothing to do with any healing properties, but the macros would normally just splash a shot of soy sauce into almost everything. So we have the Banche tea, that's the last ingredient. The Banche tea, this is really interesting how they got this. They call this Twig tea, Kudzu Twig tea. And it's a tasty tea. It's not real strong. It doesn't have that floral kind of green tea kind of a flavor to it. It's much more neutral, sort of. It's not quite like a black tea. It's not quite like an oolong. It's much more neutral. It's pleasant. It's easy to take. It's actually quite nice. I don't drink it because it's so sort of nondescript. I used to drink more of it. I don't drink that much now. Maybe I'll make some tomorrow. But the Kudzu tea, they literally invented this about 50 years ago. They were cutting down the tea bushes. And you cut down the tea bushes, and what you want with the tea is you want the leaves. You want the 2 buds and a leaf. You want the buds and the leaf, and that's where they make tea from. Well, you had all these stems getting thrown out, getting burnt and discarded and everything like this. So some of these macrobiotic teachers with a $sign in their mind said, well, why don't we convert this to cash? They did just that. They started trimming off the twigs, cleaning them up very nicely, and now you go and buy Kudzu tea. And they started selling this probably back in the late 60s, early 70s. It was called Banche tea, Kudzu tea. It's all the same thing. It's the twigs from the actual tea plant, and it helps alkalize the acidity from anything that it's being added to. So these guys are cooking down right now, and it's cooked for a while, so you can see that plum is getting pretty done. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to finish this thing off. I'll take a drink. So the way we finish this off is we add we're going to add that directly in there, and then I'm going to stir it a little bit, and I'll keep it on the side here to stir while you want to bring it back to a little bit of a boil. And just as it starts to simmer, just like if you were making a roux on the stove and you were cooking, you were thickening up something by adding some flour to it, some arrowroot to it. Well, it's starting to thicken up already. So the kudzu, when the heat gets on it, tends to thicken up, and it goes from a milky white to much more of a translucent color. Now I brought this to a mild boil. It's simmering here on the stove a little bit, and we can turn it off now. And better use a pot holder. This is going to get a little hot. So there we are. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah. The dominant smell here is from the Umeboshi plums, which are really salty. So what I've got here is I've got a little, I'm going to put this I'm going to strain it out because you don't want to drink the tea at all. So we're going to strain this right here. And then I'm going to put this into one of my glasses. I like to drink out of wine glasses. I have a penchant for wine glasses, and hopefully that's not going to break on me right now. If it does, I'm in trouble. But in general, you can put a spoon in there, it'll absorb some of the heat. In general, wine glasses will not crack with boiling water. And if you're worried about it a little bit, make the glass a little bit warm before you put it in. And they're made to be dishwasher safe, wine glasses. So wine glasses, you can use them to put boiling water, hot tea in them, various things like that. And I'm going to add a little drop of soy sauce, not much. I need salt like a hole in the head. Well, more than enough. All right, Tamari, Kudzu, Banche tea. Umeboshi Kudzu, they call it. Umeboshi Kudzu. How weird is that? U-M-E, Banche for the Twig tea, Kudzu. Umeboshi Kudzu. Very, very salty with an interesting pickly kind of a back taste to it. I would normally drink not a whole lot of this. It's terribly salty. I don't have anything wrong with me right now, so I don't really need it. It's not going to hurt me. It's probably going to give me a little bit more energy, which I need like a hole in the head again. But it's real medicine. It really is. And the macrobiotics were around in the 60s in America. It really started to get popular in America around 1966, right around the time that the health food movement got going. And the reason I got into macrobiotics is I was working at AT&T at the time, and I was developing an ulcer. I also had a part-time job. I was driving cabs, and I was going to school. So I wasn't just at the phone company. I was pretty busy. Now, as a cab driver, I would be there with a cup of coffee in one hand, a cigarette in another hand, in a traffic jam in New York. And at one point, there was an ad for these ulcer drugs, and they had a picture of a cab driver with a cup of coffee and a cigarette. I said, well, that's me. Well, I developed an ulcer. I was getting some stomach pains on and off. And one night we went out to Nathan's for breakfast at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I worked a midnight shift. We'd go out in the middle of the night in New York, no big problem. Breakfast all over the town, meals everywhere. So one night we went to Nathan's. So I eat a hot dog at Nathan's. I get back to work 2 hours later. I'm doubled up in pain. I'm in my early 20s. I said, gee, is there any connection between the food I ate and me doubling up? I wasn't exactly the brightest guy at the time. So I said, well, let me go back again tomorrow night and try it again. So I go back, and it's a good hot dog, too. It's a Hebrew National kosher hot dog. Nice bun. Well done. Very delicious. So we go back the second night. I have another hot dog. 2 hours later at work, boom, I'm doubled up again. They're like, this is not good. So I try to get registered. This is AT&T in New York, so we're talking thousands of people. They have a big medical unit. I said, listen, I think I'm getting an ulcer. Can I sign up to get tested for this? Well, the waiting list at the phone company to get tested for the ulcer was over 3 months. I literally watched people getting dragged off the floor with bleeding ulcers. It was a common ailment among managerial staff, especially at the phone company. So I could see that this wasn't going to be the answer. So I talked to a friend of mine about it. He said, well, do you know anything about this rice diet, the macrobiotics? So I said, I didn't really know anything about it. And he introduced me to it, and I looked up some information, and they had a cure for ulcer. And the macrobiotic cure for ulcers was a 10-day brown rice fast. So just like you might go on a juice fast, which I'll talk about at another time, these different fasts, a juice fast or the lemon water fast or a water fast or just a salad fast. The macros, to introduce you to their carbohydrate-centric rice diet, put you on a 10-day fast. Well, once you eat just a mono food, one after another, you get less and less digestive issues going on. The ulcer literally cleared up in about 2 or 3 days. And the pain was gone. I was feeling terrific. And from that point on, I started to get more and more into this particular diet. When we get into the fasting, I'll talk about how I ended that diet, which wasn't the best thing in the world. And as many people have said, any fool can fast, but it takes a wise person to break a fast. And like I said, we're going to talk about fasting a little bit more in a couple of weeks. So that was the main thing I just wanted to talk about today. In the middle of this, I've mentioned macrobiotics a dozen times. I wrote a book of poems about a long time ago called If It's Not Chocolate, Don't Eat It. And I'll put it right there for a second. I'll put it right over there for a second. If it's not chocolate, don't eat it. This book is not available in bookstores anywhere. I self-published, gave out a bunch of copies, and these are probably the last 2 I have in existence. But what I did was I wrote a poem at one point. When I mentioned macrobiotics, I've used the word macroneurotic. As with most dietary regimens, when people start to get into them, and it wasn't just macrobiotics, people now on paleo diets or whatever particular one they're on, Jeannie Craig or something, it works for them maybe, and they start to feel like it should work for everybody and the whole world should do it. And you get a little bit neurotic about it, which is how I developed the concept macroneurotics. I was heavily into macrobiotics. It was healing me, it was healing my family. As a result of it, I developed this brown rice tofu sandwich, which started a whole business, which led to Wildwood Natural Foods, and that's a whole story for another day. But initially at the time, we went to Boston where the heart of it was. And that's where the main teachers were, where Michio Kushi, who was the main teacher for the system, was. And they had an institute there and a cooking school and all this stuff back in the early 80s. So I went to Boston to study macroneurotics, and while I was there, I got to see the underbelly of it, the hypocrisy here and there. Now within it, the concepts are very valid, extremely valid. They were the ones who first were the real big proponents of yin and yang in terms of food. Some things are yin, some things are yang, and you want to have balance in your life by bringing these together and have a neutral point. Within the community, there was disagreement about certain items on yin or yang, so there was a little bit of a disagreement within the whole community about it, but that was minimal compared to the chauvinism and the sexism and the making money part of it. And I wrote this poem called By Locally Imported from Japan. And I mentioned in here, I'm going to read the poem through, and then I'll go back and maybe explain a couple of the items. The deadly nightshade enters the bloodstream, poisoning massive numbers of believing macro minds. Tomatoes, no. Potatoes, no. Eggplant, no. No more food for profit. By locally imported from Japan. Poisoned by their own beliefs and knowing in their minds that the time of smoking was yesterday, they stopped looking beyond their noses, stopped chewing beyond their mouths. By locally imported from Japan. Aveline died of cancer, Morimoto died of cancer, the kid overdosed. The master constricted from too much salt. They died in search of, the fact that they died in search of truth was not so obvious. Civilization is the cause and cancer is the cure. The plague of cancer is cured by self-sacrifice. The excess invested in skylights for executives. By locally imported from Japan. Not seeing the connection between the prophet and the prophets. Treating women like concubines, chewing all day and into the night. Hoping seaweed from Japan can become from California. By locally imported from Japan. So that was this little poem I wrote, and it opened up talking about nightshade. The macros were very much against any nightshade vegetables. They didn't eat potatoes or tomatoes. Everything was cooked. Even salads were pressed to get the water out of them. And over time, they started to get, like I said, poisoned by their own minds. Chewing was an essential part of their regimen. And no doubt about it, chewing well improves your digestion. You can take it to extremes, and they took it to extremes. So the idea was that you would chew every bite 100 times. Well, I had dinner with somebody one night who chewed every bite 100 times. Now let me tell you, I was bored to death. The physical benefits he might have gotten, or she, were overshadowed by the social and emotional damage that was getting touched to me sitting there with somebody eating like that. And then Abilene was Michio's wife. She had cancer. The guy that wrote this book, the book here, Healing Ourselves, he died of cancer. Their son overdosed from drugs. Being very much into health food, they were very much down on drugs, and the kids couldn't do anything. So they couldn't eat sugar, they couldn't have this, they couldn't have that. Well, the more you tell a group of people not to have, what are they going to do? They're going to have. And that's exactly what the kids did, and the one kid died of an overdose. The sort of motto they had was civilization is the cause and cancer is the cure. Spot on. Absolutely spot on. I think they're right about that. To this day we could, in fact, there's an article by Jane Brody in the paper today, which probably won't get to because we're pushing a half hour. And at the end of it here, I said, they did, seeing the connection between the prophet, which is the guy that's writing the book, and the prophets, the excess was invested in skylights for executives. While I was in Boston, selling my brown rice tofu sandwiches, I was selling them at Erewhon, which was owned by the whole community. And at the time, they were trying to unionize the people that were on the floor because they were making all their money making granola and flour, which were two things that they didn't really promote so much philosophically, but financially it worked for them. So the place was filled with all this flour. The people on the floor were ingesting the flour. The granola machine is going all night. They wanted to unionize. So Michio, this is early, like 80, 81. Suddenly he shows up. I'm there doing my delivery one day. He shows up with these workmen carrying his desk in. They're carrying his desk upstairs. They put skylights in the place for the few executives in the top. Does this sound familiar? While the people on the floor are if they're making minimum wage, a lot of them are working for nothing, for the privilege of working there, even some of them. So there's a real disparity between this whole thing. So in order to try to stop the union, puts the desk in, comes downstairs, has a general meeting. And I'm there for this whole thing. And he gets everybody together, they get down, they're sitting on the floor in a little Caesar posture. Let us pray. And they pray for the health of the company and everything. What a bunch of BS. I was out of Boston pretty soon after that, came back to California, and reconfigured my life. As I said, they were treating women like concubines, and we had seaweed that was growing on the California coast. They were promoting seaweed coming from Japan. So that was the whole point of the poem, buy locally imported from Japan. There's no such thing as locally imported. Jane Brody is going to have to wait for another day. She got a hangover tomorrow from too much beer or whiskey sours or whatever it is you're going to drink for St. Patrick's Day. Have a Umeboshi plum with a little Kudzu, and you'll feel fit as a fiddle. Alrighty, peace, patience, and we'll see you as soon as we can.